Hey guys, Moshi Mochi here, and we're back with the Forestcraft Altersphere Take 2 draft infographic. We'll start things off by saying that Forestcraft is generally one of the more underrated crafts in Take 2. A lot of people see its small follower size and decide, oh, it can't really play a long game, it's destined to just be an aggro deck. But that's not entirely true. I mean, you have a lot of value tools you can draft, value stuff, mid-range, big, medium-sized stuff, card draw, fairy generators, and you can definitely have a value-oriented draft instead of just pure aggro all the time. And like you're not always just playing to aggressively swing the board every game, like unlike what most people might think. So starting things off, we got Marduk, 7.77. He has, that anti-follower clause, and then he benefits you from playing spells and amulets. Well, the amulet thing's cute, but the problem with that is a lot of these amulets, they try to come down as quickly as possible. You have them in your hand, and you're just playing them down as soon as you have floating play points. You're not keeping them in your hand because you need to get value from them. Same thing with the spells. Like, you might have the hard removals, but the soft removals you're going to be using in the mid-game turns, trying to snowball board, push board, and then drop like one or two followers in that case. And then the anti-follower obviously hurts a lot. You're trying to play a lot of small stuff. You definitely have a lot of stuff that's going to be in your hand sitting there, fairies generated, and just general like 2, 3, 4 drops that you're definitely going to have sitting in your hand if you have this card played. Slow Kami. He's actually like okay. You can definitely do some very cool things with him. He's very good at like securing lethals in the late game. The problem is like sometimes like the stuff is really small. Like you have to play the 5 and then play like the 3 or 4 and then you bounce this. It's a very weak like play like board wise. It's only if they have like 3 to 6 life left and then you can finish them off over 2 turns or 1 turn, and then it's very hard to interact with. Otherwise, like you're going anti-board by bouncing your stuff, and then they can just play a ward, remove your stuff, and then it's very hard to come back from in that case. And then in the mid-game turns, it's like pretty awkward. Sometimes you just have it, you evo it hidden, and then you're sort of locked out in the board. You can sort of mitigate this by playing this last in like a chain of cards. Like you can play like Fairy, Okami, and that won't bounce, at least for that turn. And then, the opponent's still sort of pressured to remove it. But it's like conditionally bad, which is why it's here. And it's lethals aren't like too reliable. So Pascal, unfortunately, it has the same line of text that the Runecraft version has. 6 play 0.45, same stats, but it's a 6 drop now. Basically, it's like completely vanilla. Like the at least 4 is like super hard to activate. Like sure, you might be able to throw this on board and then have it live a turn, and then you play your other Forestcraft followers at the following turn. But like that's super inconsistent. And then like the late game turns, if you're trying to like bank a bunch of fairies or wisps, like that's not very good because you're like you have to definitely have a high value deck in order to even bank your fairies, because a lot of fairy generators, they're very low value on board. You have to keep up the snowball, or at least keep up on board and make up for the tempo loss you did for like playing something like a fairy circle or a whisper. You can't just like keep the fairies in hand for like a combo, especially one that this one doesn't even like win you the game, like a 4-5 like 1-1 like buffing all that. Like they can hard remove the Pascal, and then you just have like 2/2s that are just buffed. All right, the Bale. So this card, you can definitely cheese people out with it. The problem is, like, with a lot of cost reduction cards, is it has to be in your opening hand, and then you have to curve out, like, really well, have the stuff, like, trade in. Forestcraft doesn't even like trading in that much. You just do your chip damage, people trade into your stuff, and then you clear with your, like, fairies on board or, like, random pings, and that usually works out. So mostly it only goes to, like, 3 or 4, and then in the late game, it's, like, it's a very bad top deck, 7 play 0.44 ward. Like, you can only play, like, this and, like, a couple small stuff on turn, which might be okay, but like it's definitely below rate in that case. And then like you're not getting it more than like 1 to 2 like discounted in the early games, so it's sort of rotting in your hand until you can just bring it out for just average quality, like 3 to 4 play points. That's not like too amazing. So Azudia, this card's pretty cool. Like it can lethal people out of nowhere if you have like the owl stuff hiding, which is a pretty cool application with this card. And, he can get the lethal himself if he sticks on board and they don't have a ward and can't clear this card. The problem with this card is through 1 to 9, you're already doing a lot of chip damage. Like, you're already struggling to sort of stay on board in the later game turns. And when you're, like, dealing, like, 10 or 12 damage, like, the extra, like, dealing 4 or dealing 2, it doesn't really make much of a difference in that case. And you also really can't control, like, the pace of the game or, like, how the game's going in that case. where he can be like really good, like he can just win you the game on the spot, or he can just be really bad. And in the games where he's really good, like you could just have just a generic good, maybe not like not this card, but like a generic good sort of big fatty, and then like a snowball board alongside a fatty should win the game just as fine. But the times where he's bad, he's definitely bad. So Jerry, ironically, I think his fan like the obviously the no duplicate thing is like draft dependent, like I always say. But ironically, I think like the end of turn, like even if you get this might be like the worst effect, or it might be worst in Forestcraft because you have a lot of small followers. Like you can only throw out one a turn. Like you can't have two things stick on board after, which Forest likes to do. Like if you stick only like a fairy or something that's only like 3/3 with the buff, sure you get the pings at the end of the turn. That's great and all, and like you can like throw stuff before and like trade it. But for the most part, like a lot of your stuff is small, so I don't actually think it's like super strong in the end. And you sort of do want to like snowball by putting multiple followers on the board. So even Jerry might not be that good in Forest. But like still, you can definitely pick him off if you have a no dupe deck by like the 15th/30th pick for some reason. So Palo, this is the fighter of Forestcraft. You can play him as a fighter anytime. Sometimes you do end up playing him as a fighter even if you have a combo possible because you have like another combo card in your hand and you want to combo that card instead. Like it's like the first one in the chain, and then you only play 2 cards in the turn. But for the most part, when you play it out for the combo, you're definitely going to be picking the Fire Lizard option. This is a ping 1 and this is a bounce. The bounce is a pure bounce. There's no other benefits for actually bouncing something. So you definitely have to have like a card that benefits from that. And those are pretty rare. And then if you go anti-board, it's not very good for you because you're trying to snowball. Like it's pretty hard to get like a value amulet or value follower back to your hand. So the ping will definitely help out. You can trade in fairies and do a bunch of stuff. Finish off a bunch of stuff. So it's a freebie on top of a fighter. But for the most part, it actually stays a fighter. So Lily, I compare this a lot to the Blessed Fairy Dancer or something like that. Like it's conditional too, so like it's pretty weak as a 2 play point 1/1, and then when it evos, it gives 2/2 to something. The problem with that is like the evo is nice and all, like you can actually like throw it onto like a fairy or something, trade or go face, but the non-regular statted evo is definitely a huge killer. Like if it was 3/3, it would be amazing. But 2/2, it doesn't trade into basically anything other than like 1-drops or random token cards. So it crashes in and only gives a buff. Like it's too situational in this sense to sometimes give value at all. And it's sort of dead in the hand until you're snowballed. So that's definitely a very bad detriment to this card. But sometimes you can make it work. It scales with the more unfair things you can do in Forestcraft. Like if you're a very fairy heavy generated draft, you can sometimes make it work in that case. And you can sometimes just, get this off in the mid to late game turns and it ends up being okay. But it's inconsistent. I'd advise against it. Definitely don't pick up 2, but it can sometimes work out. Burst Shot, it's a pretty nice card. It gives Forestcraft a tool that they really appreciate because you have a lot of small stuff, a lot of fairies. Your opponents are going to be trading into your stuff like, one at a time. And they'll definitely have a lot of injured followers that you have to deal with. And this one deals with them in a really nice manner. Just, 1/1/1/1. Just ping, just sort of like the Swordcraft follower. So as a bonus, you get the Enhanced 10 where you can just deal it to the enemy leader. So the benefit to that is, just late game finisher. You can deal 5 to 6 damage if you're really lucky with enough generated for fairies that died. The benefit to this is it's not like other combo cards where you have to like keep the fairies in hand, have them like rot in your hand, and then have this rot in your hand. This actually ends up being either a removal spell or a finisher if you need it. So it's definitely flexible enough, and you can even take it higher if you want to. So Venera, the monkey, it's pretty cool. I forgot to put the Evo in, but the Evo has a storm. It gives a storm but no stats. And then it has the Evo if it's buffed by something like a Found. So I'm going to talk about Buff Forest, mainly with this card after. Like, I'll go very in-depth about just buffs and Forest in general. But it's actually very unreliable to get the buff off. Like, stuff like Fount, Genesis, like random stuff. You're already, like, sort of pressured to, like, play these out. And then it doesn't Evo for, like, full stats. So you're basically trading in like turn 5 and 6. You rarely get to afford just dropping this down, evoing on 6, and just storming to the face. Like they might still be at like 15-14 life, and you're just evoing, hitting in, and then this gets removed by something, and then your board just gets wiped. Like, you definitely want just value stuff on your evo still. And like I said, the free evo on buff is pretty inconsistent, you'll find, even with like some of the Forestcraft tools that might be available now. So Skyhorn, speaking of something super inconsistent, you can basically ignore this tag and treat this as sort of a 9 play point, like Gilgamesh like Storm Follower, and like it ends up being okay. Like, the difference between these two cards is, well, this one comes down a turn earlier, but another thing is, like, this one rewards you for doing all your chip damage early. This one, it doesn't really matter what you did early. You just want to be neutral on board or like winning a lot on board, which is hard to guarantee. This one is just your late game finisher. You guarantee 14 damage of chip damage, and this one's always a top deck that waits in your deck, and you can potentially just top deck lethal. And that's like actually a very solid option to have. The downside to this card is just it can't trade very well 6-4. It can sure trade with like Goliath-sized bodies, but it's not consistent that way. Like, sometimes they have just big stuff in the late game and it can't trade very well. But otherwise, you can just throw it down. Even if you have like a bunch of small stuff, throw it down, get a bunch of pressure in. They have to remove it, of course. But if they can't, 12 damage over 2 turns will definitely seal the deal. And sometimes even the 6 damage storming in will seal the deal. So Legendary Fighter, standard filler plus. I go over this a lot, and I don't want to go over this like in all 8 videos, so I'll just leave it at that. You can definitely pick it higher if you randomly have stuff, but for the most part, you'll have them here. So Tia. Tia scales well with bounce. You get the Eve, which is the vanilla 4/4. You can just treat it as like a pseudo 5-drop, which is already fine. It lets you start the curve on turn 1, which is definitely very valuable. The problem with, well, it's not a problem, but like bounce isn't really in the format at the moment, so you can't really abuse it. And the multi-follower thing, you can get this one down, but it's not like super unfair. It's definitely just a freebie bonus, but this one you can sometimes get, but it's really unreliable. For the most part, you'll be very happy if you get the first discount on it, and it's solid in that regard. Just a freebie 1-drop that you can sometimes weave into your mid-game turns, drop it down, and then you get the free combo discount on it. So Storied Falconer, it's very good for curving out since you get the Raptor with Storm after. Like, the 1/3 trades okay. It complements fairies really well, like 1/1 into 1/3. That's actually fairly decent. And then the 2/1, it helps you trade with a bunch of stuff. You can give it Bane with the Evo, and you can just ram it in like 1-drop, 2-drop, and then 3-drop. Helps you curve really well. And it scales decently into the late game still. So Lycra, I'm paranoid about forgetting Evo, so this one I actually did manage to remember. So 4 play point 1/3, Bane. So on the Evo turns, it's basically the same thing with like a lot of Banes. It's basically an infinite 3. Like, they can't ram into this safely, and then it kills everything on retaliation, basically. And then you can throw this onto a fairy. In the late games, it's pretty nice. You just throw this onto something small, a fairy, and then you can kill something really big. And then this can test stuff really well, like 1/3 Bane. The only problem is it's not very aggressive. As a bonus, the Evo actually puts it onto all the Banes, so you can like combo it with like anything you have on board, since it gives that thing Bane, and also gives itself, which is something you don't normally see. And something super niche, but you could have a Genesis of the Legend and then have like all your followers or the Bane ones randomly get buffed. And this is actually very valuable. It helps itself become like sort of a Goliath size. You can trade it with 5 attack followers, and then your other thing, if it's like a 2/3 trading into like a 2/2 or a 3/3, then it lives, and that's a really big deal if they don't have like pings to clear the other follower. So Apostle of Unkilling. This tutor effect is mainly meant for this card, like constructed wise, but you can get like circles and stuff with it. Like you'll definitely be drafting these cards anyway, so it's like a freebie, even if you don't get it. 3/6 above rate, sort of. It evolves decently. 5/8. It's really hard to clear, and it trades with everything in the mid game. But the problem with this part is like you never want stuff on the opponent's board. If it heals for 3, I won't say you're doing things wrong, but you're in a bad position because the opponent's going to be they're going to have a lot of stuff to trade into your stuff after. So like this part ends up being sort of useless, and this is just like a freebie draw card if you have the cards in your deck. So Selwyn, people might be wondering, oh, why is this card so low? This part definitely gets better because you can just sort of draft it as like removal, like 2-drop deal 3 removal, and you're fine with that since you have other legendaries and golds to fall back on. But this part ends up being fairly average. Like the problem with this, like the combo clause with this, is it's on a 5 play point card. You're not gonna always have the luxury of just holding fairy in your hand. So even this part is relatively inconsistent. Like think about like a naturally curving deck. Like it'd be like a 2-drop into 5-drop. You have to hold this until turn 9. And then like for the most part, you're gonna be pressured to like just play it out as a 3/5 generic ward, and that's where it ends up. And Forestcraft actually has a lot of like generic 5-drops that have like random benefits, and this one ends up being like sort of average in that case. Again, with the at least 4, I don't consider that like consistent enough to sort of, you know, bank on. The combo 2 is already hard enough to enable, but it will be solid in that regard if it goes off, which is why it's sort of here. So Proto's sort of funny, like, you know, Proto Prince, whatever, like, you know, obviously Forced is sort of aggressive, and you have the problems of Proto, you know, wiping your own board. It ends up with a lot of chip damage. Maybe you can like bait out their retribution slashes, whatever, and then the Proto just lives and does damage forever, and you can just win off that. But it's sort of unreliable, and you know, when in games you're snowballing, it's definitely terrible. So Carbuncle, you know, it's a pretty neat card. 4 play point 2/2. You can play it on your sack turns. You can accelerate for card draw. The Sparkles is I believe it's a heal, draw, and Evo point gain. Like I know the other two, I just don't know if it's a heal. I believe it is. But then the Fanfare, you can shuffle 4 into your deck, and then when you evo it, it heals, it recovers 2, and then gives you 2 play points back. So you can evolve it sort of like a 2 play point follower. I feel like the problem with this card is just it scales really badly. Like in the early games, it's like arguably not even like too strong. Like you still have to draw the Sparkles from your deck, and sure, in take 2, you know, 30 cards, you're gonna be like 25, 23 in, and then you shuffle these in, you're pretty much gonna draw 1 or 2 by the mid to late game. And that's like fairly fine, but it's still sort of pressured to evo. You're playing a low tempo follower in a deck or in a draft, in a craft that sort of wants to curve out really strongly, have a bunch of residual threats and a bunch of threats on board each turn. This card, you're just letting the gas off the pedal and then just inviting your opponents to sort of just have a safe turn or have a easy turn of removal, and you might not be able to snowball a board from that state. So Cetus, he's very big for a 5-drop. 3/7 is enormous stats. Like 5/9, like I'd pay like even like 7 for that on the Evo stats with like no text. That you could pay 7 for that and you'd be like reasonably happy. It has ward, which is like free benefit, and then if you crash in 1 follower, you get a righteous evocation, which is like fairly strong. It's a 3 play point or 3 damage removal. And then it gives you the bonus of healing with a combo, which you can sometimes use or not use if you don't feel like it. So it's like strong in that regard. Just draws a removal most of the time, and you just play it as an overstated follower. Like this compared to this is just 2 up in most cases in the mid-game turns, which are very important for Forest, which is why I rate this sort of higher. So Drazel, she's pretty nice. Your 6 play point, I call it an Imp Lancer. Obviously, it's only Rush, but the rest Drain. Like Drain is sort of, I won't say useless. It's not too great in Forest because you're not very concerned with your life total. The creation's nice. You know, you can play it as 2/6. You can sometimes evo'ed if you need to, and then just draw 2, or use it for bonus combos later. And the Wrath of Nature, like if you're setting up lethals, you can have a wide board, and then you can use the thing on like something really big, waiting to storm from hand. That's like fairly decent. And like you know, obviously you pick this one when you have the enough value in hand and you want to be aggressive, and then the creation when you need more card draw, or you can obviously nature itself and then be like that Rush Implanter when you need it, or like when you're out of evos. So Moon and Sun, like I actually think like Tsukuyomi ends up being the best, not the best, but like it ends up being strongest in this craft because you can just weave it out alongside a bunch of fairies. Like your opponents are already pressured a lot. Like they're gonna be using their pings left and right just to clear fairy, follower. So you just have infinite Tsukuyomis. Eventually, they're just not gonna have pings to deal with it, and they have to trade like regular 2 damage, 3 damage removal, and then it becomes better than Amaterasu in that regard. And then just infinite value. It's pseudo card draw. Like it's actually good in Forest because your curves are sort of low, and you can just throw stuff alongside it, be annoying. So Gilneas, same thing. This effect is the best in Sword and Forest in a sense. So you'll definitely have a lot of small stuff to buff, fairies on board, whatever. The card draw can be a nice late game. Ambush drains, great stuff. Guarantees damage and heals you for in the mid to late game where you might just you might just give up on board and you might be just waiting to kill your opponent that way. So Prince, I talked about this in the sword video that Prince might end up being best in Forest in a sense that they have really safe like mid to late games. Like it's very rare that you'll be like you might end up losing board like 7 to 8, but you're like 1 to 6 is like super safe. You have like high value, a lot of pressure on board, and you can sort of like leverage that into like a very safe Prince drop. So it might be higher in that regard. Like I genuinely respect it as like a high pick in Forest, especially because you might have problems with like closing out the late game. You can just draft a deck that's like all value, all sticky to the board, and then just drop a Prince and just win from that. And that's very, very reasonable. So Shama, Noblekin, the two sisters, 3 play point 2/3, basic stats, and then it draws the 2 damage removal. This heals like a Vampire's Kiss. And then this one's like one. I joke that it's like the first unkilling card, or like one of the early unkilling cards. That it lowers attack by 1 for every card in your hand. So it's like fairly decent, but like you're gonna have like very few cards by the late game, and that's where like this is useful the most. In the early game, the Antics is gonna be able to clear like random stuff. It heals you too as like a bonus. But like 4/3 evo into something, ping 2, that's gonna do a premium clear, or you can just hold it, or you can just drop it as a 5-drop and then clear something and then save your evo. All those things are super valuable, and the gaze is like situational in hand. It's like waiting for a big drop. All right, Lisa. So this thing was like lower before, and then I was thinking about it and playing with it a bunch, and like it's just your just like a 3 play point draw 2. But like that's already good enough. Like Forestcraft definitely appreciates its card draw. You play this, you get your low drop like Water Fairy, you can weave it out, or like a 2-drop, something like that. And then it draws you, quote unquote, your best cards from your deck, which is true. High cost forest cards, they're definitely high value. 5 drops, 6 drops. Even it can sometimes fetch 4 drops, which is funny enough, just because your Forestcraft stuff might be very low. But yeah, just draw 2. You can afford to draft it more just because of the draft changes as well. It doesn't like clog out like all your power slots. But speaking of your power slots, I'll just transition into Mitera, because this is just, again, like I said, 3 play point, 1/3, draw 2. Great card, you'll take it as a value card. So Mitera, Pure Shot. This card, I don't have the metrics for it, but I know this is the highest win rate Forestcraft card, like just from personal experience, like playing against it and with it. This card is very valuable in the sense that it's sometimes a draw 2. Like it's often a draw 2. You ping, it basically kills everything in the early game. You have like 5-6 cards in hand with or without fairy generation, and it gives you so much information. Like you can tell if the opponent has removal for it, if they have like a pseudo clash for it to deny your clash. If they don't, like you get a bunch of value off it, and you get a bunch of information off it. So like the information I consider like super valuable. It tells you a lot about what they have in hand, what they don't have in hand, and then like you can deal with it accordingly. And like it generates like so much value, and it does so much of what Forestcraft wants. 5/4 is enough to trade with like Goliath-sized bodies. You'll ping off the really big follower, post-evolve follower, and then you can just crash into like a 2 or 3 drop, and that's like amazing. And like yeah, again, card draw, removal, all that in like one package. It's like a great card. Korva. So I had it like sort of here before, like in the first iteration of like Forestcraft when this card just came out. But this card ended up being like very amazing. Like the fills are, I won't say like a win condition, but like you can throw it on like fairies and they'll be like threatening as soon as you get the 4 for its condition for like multi attacks. Like the enhance is just like freebie, like it'll always cost 5, and you can just throw it. Helps you trade. Enables like a bunch of buff synergy. There's like less stuff now, but you can always get a defender, and then it's like super premium. So like even without that stuff, it helps you trade. It gives you some late game inevitability for like some fairies, and it's like free value with the bonus of like, oh, you get more if you're hurt more. So Green Glen, speaking of some late game inevitability, 6 play point 6/5. This thing has the Zeta stats. It does the same thing it does for Sword. It trades super well, puts up pressure. The opponent has to remove it. And the 6 play point buff helps it tremendously. Like 6 to 10, all you need to do is just be Forestcraft. Like, have a bunch of fairies in hand, have a bunch of value, random stuff in hand, and you just do 8 chip damage. That's like completely free. Like you don't have to like hit anything in. You just put down a bunch of followers or spells or random combo stuff on board, and you just deal damage. So it helps you close it out the game like ridiculous. Not to mention, like, you'd play this stat line. Like, I'll go over why this card's like amazing too. But like you just play it just for its stat line, and it's already like amazing. But like the fact that you get a free leader ability that helps you close out the game, it's exactly what Forest wants. Speaking of something that Forest exactly wants, you got, like I said, the neutral Abyss Summoner. Sure, again, you can get your duds, but this card's definitely great in Forest. It gets you your card draw, just random followers you can dump on board. You know, your opponent's already struggling to get back on board. Turn 7, you just dump a bunch of stats or random spells and stuff, and you're pretty set for the late game. Alright, no break again. I'll just get to the neutrals. I'll just take a slight detour in case I need to pause this for anything. So Michelle, Mind Reader. So this card's sort of weird because it's sort of good and like sort of bad, but the problem is like it can be sort of bad. Like when you have to evo it, like it's your only follower in hand or something, like it doesn't purely trade. Sure, there's not like a bunch of stuff that has like, you know, sort of aura abilities that like after they fanfare they stay on board and have like an ability. But the fact that it doesn't clear your opponent, sure, like it ends up being like a 4/4 or like a 2/2 after, but it doesn't cleanly clear stuff. Like the application it has is obviously you just ram it into a big thing and then your other followers trade into it and it's like a 0 and then you got a free trade from that. But like other than that, like it's sort of like average and like sort of weird in the sense that it's like not too good, but it's not too bad either. So Mark of Unkilling. So you got a 0 play point spell. You get the free banish from like random unkilling stuff. Like if mainly just this card, just super debuffing something, and you get the draw banish. It's like very valuable in that sense. But then you get the bonus that it's like a better lightning blast. Like it can't hit amulets, but of course. But you know, draw a card, banish a follower. That's super premium. Hard removal is great in rune or great in forest. So you'll definitely appreciate taking 1 or 2 if you don't get the whispers. So Owlman. So 3 play point 2/3, like it got better with less retribution in the format. Before you'd play like these two and you just, because you commit like basically all your play points and then you're basically struggling to close out the game anyway, or like your followers are slowly getting removed. They play bigger stuff and you play these and you just let your opponent retribution for less play points and then you just lose the game from there. So it gets better in the sense that there's less retribution. Like 6/3 on 7, like you can close out the game pretty easily from there. All you need to do is 14 damage early. And then as a benefit of just coming down 3 play point 2/3, that's perfectly respectable stat line. Sometimes it ends up being okay now. It can be like sort of higher, but like it's not like super value. It's mainly just like, oh, I hope they don't have the retribution to like deal with it. So Witherwood, like if you've played Forest a lot, like you know like the buff is super hard to get on it. Like sure, you might say, oh, the payoff's not that high as this one, but keeping buff stuff in hand or just drafting it in general is actually ridiculously hard, even without like some massive payoff or reason to draft them. Like 3/6 board is good enough. You can just play it down. It has good stat line, good ability, and you'll just be reasonably happy to take it just as some like 5 play points semi-fatty. And these semi-fatties are like fairly good in Forest because you want to like protect your small stuff. All right, Owlbear. I'm actually like really down on this card in general. Like it's up now because of the divine, I won't say nerf, but like, you know, the lower rates of getting in. Like 8 play point ambush, like the unkilling tag on this is like sort of weird because you sort of want to be killing their stuff, but it obviously does have its applications. Like it lowers a lot of followers attacks and it is very annoying. Like you can keep doing it, but in general you're just going to be throwing it down on 8 and then hitting face the next like few turns if you can. But it like trades decent and it like lowers the enemy followers board, so it's like decent in that sense. But you definitely don't want 2. Just like 1 randomly in your deck is perfectly reasonable, and it's like a decent pickup, especially with like the lack of like big late game and if you don't get some stuff in your golden legendary picks. So next up we got Disciple. So this card is like your fake Rakam. Like you can just use it as a Rakam, like 5/6 Evo, lower 4. You can trade in and it's basically a free trade. So like that's super valuable. And as a bonus, like you can put it on something and then have your followers trade in sort of like this. And then they get the free trade. So it's like super flexible in that sense. And it's like you can even use it as like a mini stun. Like they have like a 4/4 on board. You use this and then you just avoid it. It ends up being like a 0/4, and you can just hit face, and they can't really use that follow the next turn. So it's flexible in that sense, fairly strong, vanilla statted. You'll definitely take it as like one of your value fours, which Forest definitely has a lot of that it's sort of competing against, but it's solid in that regard. So the Forest Defender. So a lot of people will say, oh, that you have to like force this. I don't personally agree with that. Like I said this before, but the neutral cards are the best buff cards for Forest, and these cards are like hard to take. Like I'm missing one, or I guess this also counts. But yeah, here, like they're all sort of hard to take, and you're pressured to use them. Like you're gonna get less of them now too. Like Fount is obviously like the best one, and Forest, like if they have like a 5/2 out and you have like a 1/1, you're gonna use the Fount to like trade in. You're not gonna trade 2 fairies into it for the most part, because you want to keep up the board pressure and stuff. And it's also in like sort of a weird, I won't say in a weird craft, but like Forest doesn't really benefit like the best from this, because it sort of wants to be aggressive on board, keep pushing it out. Sure, they might like swing back, but then you have to have like situational, I won't say situational cards in hand, but like sort of a weak play in hand that you have to like save until you can like get a good AoE off. And then if you're letting your opponent snowball you back, they can just have like a 3 damage or a 3 defense thing. They just play it while they're reverse snowballing you, and then this doesn't like fully clear, and then it's like really bad. But it definitely ends up being pretty good. It just suffers from like a lot of like random stuff that I can't really explain too well. Just like nitty gritty like draft order and draw order and like inconsistency. But you can definitely like take one and then like sort of like just draft your neutral buff stuff and like try to line it up. I'll explain why like I don't really like this card that much after, but I feel like, obviously one's fine, but this card I consider a better like standalone 5-drop. You don't need synergy for it. And like the buff or the AoE isn't as potent as I feel it is. Alright, so Predatory Might. So this card is as potent as you think it is. 2 play point deal 5 is ridiculous. Like Assassination Jutsu pushed Sword up so high as in the removal category. You could just like play a 2 or 3 drop and then use that, and then clear like big stuff. Like they Evo or rack them, and then you can just clear that for free. Obviously, you have to sort of set it up. But it's set up in like a really nice way, because you can like just evo a 2-drop into like their 2-drop, and then you can clear their post-evolve follower. That's a very common play, and that will be a very common play for the expansions to come. And like it benefits from like draft changes as well. Like you can just draft it randomly and just use it. Like it doesn't punish you for like not picking up value stuff later. So it's like a very solid removal spell. Small play point commitment, and it lets you snowball from there. So it's like definitely very strong. So Nelsha. I'm actually going to talk about why Dress is like, I won't say underrated, but like you should pick Dress more in the choose video. But 4 play point 3/4, you can use it as a sack. Like for the most part, you'll take the Dress, the Demon Dress anyway, just for safety. But the Angel's Dress is definitely a reasonable choice, even in like non-buff synergy decks. Like the Angels ends up being a fairly decent play. But the Demon will definitely be the safer option, which a lot of people should go for if they don't know which one to take. So Sutera, Sigurbo, it has the free Evo like AoE 1, which sometimes is irrelevant, but it has the benefit of being in a craft that has a lot of 1/1s that they put on board. So you can like AoE for 1 and then trade like a fairy into like a 2-drop, and then that clears it. Fanfare 1, you can use it as a sack. It's like fairly strong. And then it's just like a premium Evo 4. Like you'll definitely pick like all these that you can pick up. So it's very nice that Forest has like a decent array of like good 4-drops that it can play for value, especially on like the sack turns. Like it probably has the most out of any craft, where you can just throw a card on 4 and like not care that they remove it. So Forest Whispers. So this card is sort of like that Crystalia Lily, or the one that's 2 play points, and then for enhanced 6 it makes the like snowman. It does the same thing in a sense, just disguised. It's like 5 play point. Play a 1/1 and then transform something. That's like already super good. And then it's like flexible in the sense that you can just use it as 4 play point and then bank the fairy for later. And yeah, y'all appreciate hard removal, deals with problematic last words. Hard removal that's actually cheap in general. Like you don't have to commit 5 play points or 6 play points to it. Sometimes it helps you like bring out some lower drops or like snowball board from there. So you'll definitely appreciate having a Whispers or 2 in your deck. So Hornet Soldier. This card is like super cool. Like it's a choose card that lets you choose 2, choose them both. as soon as you have like a combo enabled. So it's like super strong, both of these cards. So the Hornet Warrior is a two play point rush Bane. So like you can play it as a 7 play point 5/4 kill a follower. That's like super strong already. Like freebie, kill something, 5/4 stat, better than a Dread Dragon, minus like some random ward blocking it. But the Hornet Sting can be also used like super aggressively. You can be aggressive on board and just pick up the Sting, free damage to the face. And then as a benefit, like you go like, 2-drop, 1-drop Hornet Soldier in the late game, and you can get both of them. And you can set up the combo if you're going into the late game. So it like stays flexible, and it gives you aggressive options and defensive options. So it's like definitely a very strong 5-drop. Alright, onto the bronzes. We got Devil Flower. This thing just sort of fell off. Like it wasn't, like Force wasn't like that good versus Dragon in a sense anyway. And then like 2 play point 2/1, like it's understated. And the Amulet thing, it's situational and it doesn't hit the things you want. And it's sort of, I won't say rots in your hand. You'll just play it whenever, and whenever is when it's just a 2/1. You'd rather just play regular 2s. And Forest has a bunch of good 2s now that you'd rather take than a situational tech 2-drop. So Lilia, like this enhanced 4 suffers from the thing that the sorta suffers for. Like obviously you don't have to combo it out, but you have to have like a post snowballed board, and sometimes like you can get some really good trades from. But the main problem is like it just sitting in your hand in the early turns. Like you are gonna keep it in your hand, but maybe you'll just have to throw it as a 1-drop, and like you have a 1-drop that's not Water Fairy, or that's not like a value generator. So like that's really hurtful in like getting just valued out in the end of the game. And like you do have to like sort of have this card sit in your hand waiting for like an evo'ed 2-drop, or like obviously you don't always get this combo off. So this is just a 1 play point 1/1 that sits in your hand for the most part. And I just feel like you don't even want to, right? Like even if you have like a really strong deck, like these things can rot in your hand, they can clog your drafts, they can be drawn at bad situations. So I feel like even like 1 is like reasonable because you can choose to be aggressive with it, but like you don't want to, and it's sort of like is clunky to get out anyway. So Flower Fairies, I'm actually like sort of down on this card because like, oh, it's an investigation. Like the Wisp isn't like super strong, and bounce isn't really a thing in the format anymore. But like, I'm sort of opening up to like, card draw and Forest. It works out okay, but you have like other options to take. They all have their ups and downs, but like this one's like sort of reasonable as like a 1-of. I wouldn't draft like 2 Flowers because you're not like into like a giant combo game plan with the Wisps. And like investigation isn't very strong in general anyway. So Servant, as a joke, this is like the 11th omen. Like maybe we'll have like a spell grow thing, but that's just a joke. So this stun actually does nothing because it doesn't really not do anything. You go, like in the late game, you might have this out and you can ram this into something giant, and then you can just stun an enemy follower until the end of the turn. But it's like so weird in like the early and mid game. It basically does nothing. It trades and then both things die, or like it doesn't even stop like something from like clashing. Like if something attacks into it, it doesn't like stun them after it kills them. So for the most part, it actually doesn't really do that much. Like if you evo this into something, like your odds are you're trying to kill it anyway. So the stun effect is basically non-existent for the majority of the game, and then in the late game it just gets like removed by like another 2-drop or like 2 play point removal or something. So it's not too strong in that sense, but like generic 2 play point 2/2s, Forest is happy to take them out. And like they actually have like so many good ones now, which is like a blessing. Before, like this was, I won't say like over here, but like there were just like average options that were fighters, and just fighters with upside is something Forest will gladly take. So Whispering Woods, it has a lot of text on it, but it's basically for enhanced 4, you can use it sort of as a Knight's Way that fetches just Forestcraft followers from your deck, and that's good as just card draw. You have like a lot of play points floating. You can just dump your stuff on curve and then play this, and then just play a grind game from there. And that's like reasonable because you put out a lot of pressure. Sometimes you just let the gas off the pedal and just decide, okay, let's play a more value, a slow game now. And for 2 play points, you can just use it as a countdown 1, and then regardless of the situation, you always get the stun. So 4 play points or 2 play points, so it's like good. You can like neutralize a giant follower for the turn. You can definitely use that skillfully to your advantage, and then you always draw 1 even at the 2 play points, so it's like a draw 1. Do note it is delayed though, so don't try to use it to like top deck stuff, but it is solid as a value engine, as a like 1 or 2 of is like stretching it, but you can sometimes do it in some drafts. So Grasshopper. This card, even though it says like draw a card, sometimes like you might not actually have ones in your deck, but you can like sort of combo it. Sometimes it's unreliable. It really rewards you for tracking your deck. Like, oh, I know I have like a 3/4 in my deck, and I can get it after like comboing it a bunch. But like it's a combination of like unreliable and like low statted that sort of makes it like average, even though it does like fetch. In general, it will fetch something from the deck. Alright, so I'll just go over like warding another card draw. So, you get the early Knight's Way, just draw 2. Like, draw 2 immediately is like super solid. This part is basically irrelevant. There's like random applications to like, stun, not stun, but like lower the damage of something really big. But for the most part, like 5 damage is already quite a bit. And like in the late game, you either have board or you don't. And this won't really save you. So you're just playing it as like generic card draw, and you'll definitely appreciate having a little bit in your deck if you want to play the value game. Alright, Fairy Circle. So this card lets you start the game on turn 1, which is a very important thing for Forestcraft. You can use it in the late game turns, get +3 combo, which this card also does, but it's a more play point commitment. But a funny thing is, this card like ends up being better in the sort of early to mid game in a sense, unless you can get this on turn 1, like on your draw. Because, for example, this is 3 play points to play 2 fairies. This plays 2 fairies, quote unquote. It plays the Whisperer and a fairy, and you have the fairy in hand for 3 play points. And this thing can be bounced for like random synergy if that ever pops up in the current or near future. So like in a sense, like this card's better, which is why it's sort of here in the mid game, which is the most important part. But you can definitely pick this up as like a 1-drop, spell, free combo fodder, free pressure, draw Oathless Knights at like the early game. So it's like solid in that regard. So Refuge, Fire Sprite is gone, but we still have this card in the format. Again, starting the curve on turn 1 is very important. You can just play it down, get fairies over time. It doesn't have the ping, unfortunately, but like it's perfectly reasonable. Get your value stuff going, get your combo/fairy stuff going, and it's not like I won't say anti-draw. Like it's not like one of these where you just play 1-drop and just forget about it. Like you can just throw away the fairies and you still get another one. So it's like valuable in that sense. The Yawns and the Awakening, like you can use it to stun a follower, or you can use it as a defensive like ping one. For the most part, you won't actually use the ping one. That's like super rarely used. I don't think I've ever used it. But the stun, you can definitely stun some really nice things, even though it's like random. You can sort of like pseudo control it. So Utopian Fairy, its enhance is like weird because like you never get it off. Like the 1/2s are like it goes, or the 1/2 buff, it like goes on fairies or like 2-drops, and it's like barely valuable. Sometimes it lets you get a really good trade, but like you're just playing it up from like a 2-drop. Like if it lines up, it lines up, which is why it's like sort of like decent. And like the heal 2, again, it's not too relevant for Forest because they're like aggressive for the most part, or aggressive on board at least for the most part. Most of your decks will be trying to like get your chip damage in and get your fairies down and stuff. You won't be like the person on the receiving end of the aggro for the most part. But the buffs are like decent. Like you can definitely just pick them up as a generic 2 and try to randomly get this off at times. Like buff synergy is not really a thing anymore, so you won't use it for that. And especially one that's like on sort of a clunky follower, like a clunky enhance. So Water Fairy. So you can quote me on this, but this is the low-key most important card in Forestcraft. I had a joke saying, oh, if you could pick a generic 7 or 8-drop, or you could pick Water Fairy, you should pick Water Fairy if you don't have one. Which can sort of be true, can sort of be false, depending on the format and stuff. I just like it in the sense that it lets you start the game on turn 1, and it doesn't like cost anything, because you get the fairy back no matter what, like barring some like random banish or something. So like this gets you in chip damage early. Like sure, it falls off late game, but like most 1 play point cards fall off late game, except for this one, which is funny. But yeah, just the fact that you can just get your chip damage in early, like it makes your first so strong, which is like really good for Forestcraft. Like you can actually be like a legitimate aggro deck, which is something a lot of decks really can't say. Like starting the curve on turn 1, then getting a 2-drop, 3-drop, snowballing straight from the get-go is something I value super highly. But definitely, like, depending on, like, draft style, you can, like, bump it down. You can bump down, like, even up to, like, here. like here or here. But I definitely want like people to like consider like just picking up a water fairy or two and just like spamming it as aggro, like at least to like experience it and then decide for yourself, do I want to like play more value games, and like decide which one's like better depending on the expansion or whatever. So Whisper, so this card ends up like low-key also being like super good, because a lot of people might not notice it's a 4 play point summon 3 1/1s. Like you can always use it as that function, like barring some like random stuff, but for the most part it's you can do it like that, and then you can evo it. Like that's sort of like a not a floral fencer, but the general in Swordcraft, like 3/3 trade into a 2-drop, you get a bunch of 1/1s, split bodies. Like AoE is pretty premium, especially on like the low play point curve. So they generally stick on board, and then you can use it to dictate trades. You can snowball from there, and it's like super flexible. You can just like put this down and then put a fairy down, save the other one, or like put another 2-drop instead. Like it's flexible on board. You know, it'll benefit once like good bounce comes back into the format. It's like a general good stuff card that you'll be happy to take. The only like sort of downside is obviously like 2 play point. You just play it down. If you don't have like a 1-drop to like, I won't say protect it, but to complement it, then it sort of like dies for free. And like, but you can just throw the fairies down. Like you're not down on card advantage, but you're like neutral on board, and you can sort of like come back with like random ping stuff on 4, or like just dropping the fairies you get alongside like a 2-drop. So the Zealot, this thing is like, it gets you like a free -2. This thing is generally not that relevant, but it's just the fact that it's a 2-drop with upside. Like this upside is more relevant than this upside, in my opinion. So that's why it gets like the bump up, like the hierarchy of 2-drops of doing stuff. And this one just happens to do stuff when it dies. It's just a generically good 2-drop that sometimes ends up like messing up your opponent quite a bit, or like denying something on board. So this thing, it's pretty decent, like a 3 play point 2/3 ambush. Like it hides on board, just like the Shadowcraft, like I believe it was basic expansion one. And it's like really good. You can just throw it down during the Evo turns and just have your opponent not be able to interact with it. You throw it down, you can trade with 2-drops after. And yeah, it's perfectly reasonable. And then late game, you can get your last bits of chip damage in. And it's like really hard to interact with, like super hard. It's like basically AoE or bust, like to kill this, because like Retribution's basically never gonna hit this. So this card's like sort of weird because like Deity, like it's a 7-drop, right? Like you can just play it as a 7-drop. It rushes in 6/6, 7 play point 6/6 rush. Like it's already like a good card, which is why it's like around here. But it's mainly here just because it acts like a 4, but like force forward /5/6. Those are like the turns that are super important for Forest. And in that sense, like it's just this card. Fun fact, it has like a different evo. It has like a bonus when it evo, so like 7/6 evo. Like sometimes it ends up like killing what they trade back into it, but for the most part, it just eats up like removal or something. But yeah, like Forest just has better things to play on the 4 and 5-drop slot that you can just take the one of to like treat it as a 7-drop, but sometimes it ends up like clunky and then it stays, or you have to use it as a 4-drop, which isn't like downside. It's just flexibility, but the flexibility makes it like have to compete with these cards, and these cards are sort of better in the general sense. But you'll be happy to take it, and just hopefully it'll come down as a 7-drop. All right, Sylvan Justice. So this card is like very great. You can treat it as a 3 play point 1/1 deal 2, and that's like super good. Like Evo turns, you get to skip an Evo, or even better, you can have a like fairy or something random on board. You can Evo that, and then just Sylvan Justice the follower, like they Evo'd, and then you can just have an extra fairy on board, maybe like an extra 2-drop, and then have something that you Evo and go to face, and like it's sort of going snowballing from there. And like that's already very strong. And in like even the early game, like just 2 play point, kill something, draw a card, and then like you're already up in the value game in that sense. It just does so much for the craft and for like so little cost, like combo fodder, free damage, a bunch of stuff that this card does for the craft. All right, Unkilling. So this card, I really liked it when it came out, because it lets like Forest like trade in with small stuff. It has like a bunch of random applications, like, you know, 2/2s makes them 1/2s. Like you can win a game just playing a 2-drop. They play a 2-drop, you play this, and then you hit in. Like if the opponent has like no like unfair interaction after that, like you can snowball a game just from like that play, and like that plays like super common. Like you can just have this in hand, like randomly get a freebie just because of a fanfare. Like this is just a 2-drop, like 2 play point 2/2. Like with this sort of upside, like you'll definitely be very happy to pick this up in multiples as well. Alright, so Insane Dark Elf. Like his name says, he is quite insane. I think if Pitfall was still in the format, this would have pushed either Pitfall or Splendor like down a notch. Like you wouldn't have to draft a very priority because this card would be in it. So this card's like 3 play points of Injustice, deal 4, draw a card, or like draw a fairy. That's like already valuable enough on its own. Then it sort of has like the Zeta sort of benefit where it's like a 6/4 on 6. And then you just draw a fairy after. Again, they have to interact with it. Like it's strong enough. Like 6/4 is like reasonable enough to like trade into stuff. Again, you can still go into Goliaths. Like this is just a bronze card. Like you can just use it as 3 play point deal 4 and you're already very happy with it. The fact that it has like the 6 play point enhanced like freebie onto it. Like you don't expect it to live like 1 or 2 times, but you know, the fact that it has the possibility to do that is like amazing for on 6. And like you always fall back on the removal option, and the removal option is super, super solid. So Elf General, this card is like, it's weird because it's just, Goliath or with Ward and then draw a fairy. Like all those things combined together make this card super good. Like the vanilla stat line with the Ward tag is already like good enough. It protects your followers on board. You can evo it, 5/6 trades very well in the mid game. And then just like you can throw it out in the mid game to like sack it on the evo turns and just generate value that way. Like turn 5, 5/6, 1/1. You can even evo the 1/1 for flexibility. Like all that's like super good. All right, I guess I'll just cover the neutrals really quickly. So Lyria ends up being like okay, like you can get the Gilneas combo, but it ends up being like okay because you can like weave it in with like other like Forestcraft stuff like fairies, and it might trade well just randomly. But again, it's still nothing too amazing to rely on. Card draw wise, you have a lot of like really good card draw. Like if that like Forest sort of hesitates to draft, like you don't even want too many of these, and like you definitely don't want to fall back on an investigation since these cards sort of do the job better. Same thing with Fount, like Fawn. Like Whispering Woods is sort of like a better version of Font. So if you have to fall back on it, like sure, maybe, but you want to avoid that for the most part. So Troll ends up being, you know, same thing, best in this craft and sword. Like you'll take it when you take it, but like you won't be happy, but you won't be sad either. It can put out results. So Genesis of the Legend might actually like bump up. Like of all the crafts to play it in, Forest is definitely the strongest that can use it. It's even better than sword because it can have stuff guaranteed in hand to play it off. And like, you know, 1/1's becoming 1/2 Banes, like Scorpius is. That's like super annoying for your opponent to deal with. And you can definitely like do some abusive stuff with it. Like it scales up with like, I'd say like, you know, player skill, just using it correctly. And you can definitely, it can even end up here, and I'd respect it there. So Steadfast, it does the bonus of like protecting your stuff really well in Forest because you can have like really low curves, just like dump a bunch of 2-drops, 1-drops, fairies, and you can go for aggro that way and just free value on 4. Sure, same thing, just, you know, standard value. And again, you know, your 2-drops you'll always take when you want them. Not too amazing, but you know, they all have their niches. Barkeep, free chip damage is always nice. You know, just 2/3 standard stat line. The free chip when it's like you're going second and they're trying to maybe deal some face damage, but for the most part they're going to be trading with your followers, so this doesn't activate them so much, and you're going to be aggressive most of the time anyway. So yep, Banish Amulet, same thing, you know, get a 6-drop, fairly solid stat line, especially for like Forest. And you know, Banish Amulet, just try not to have this screw you over and you'll be fine. So yeah, Paradise, you know, just solid random evo 2-drop with benefit. Seraphic, situational, hard removal. You have a lot of like hard removal and like removal in general, and even the late game removal stuff. You don't really need to pick this as high priority. So Sword Angel. This is, if you notice, this is the exact copy of the sword template. And then but I did have like opportunities to move this around, so it wasn't like laziness. But I was thinking about it and just playing around with this card, and like this card's like. Forest sort of wants to be on board. So if you have like a random fairy on board or a random something on board, this is just like a 3/1. It's just another thing that can be pinged to complement them. So it's not like super amazing in the sense. Like obviously you can just bump it up, you know, personal preference. But I actually don't think it's actually that strong in Forestcraft. just because you're more prone to have like just a random fairy just stick on board or something, and these things don't end up being live. But that's the only reason. Like you can definitely like have a more defensive draft. You can draft like low quantities of this. Like you can choose not to be a fairy generator based draft, and then you can just draft random 2-drops, and then this ends up being just as high as in other crafts. So Chaos, your generic 3 play point 32, gets better with the expansion. You'll definitely be generally happy with this card, picking it up. So the buff thing, like I said, it's really not a big deal. Like this is basically your only payoff, and it's like super hard to get it on this. So like, randomly snowballing off like a 2-drop, 1-drop like fairy, that's like reasonable. And it buffs like super well, like especially in like Forestcraft. It's the best it can be in this craft and sword. So font, like as a bonus from the sword template, this ends up being in the correct spot. So it's super good in Forest. It's definitely not like this tier, but it's like even like somewhere here, because it lets your like fairies trade in for value, like 5/2s, font, free trade, gets you card draw. It's an amazing card in Forest, and like it enables like random buff shenanigans. So don't like pick it like super highly, but you can definitely consider it for all it's worth. Like make your fairies good, make your buff stuff live. Definitely a great card in Forest. So again, Goblin Fighter, just pseudo draw card, super good in Forest, lets you carve out really nice. 1-drop, 2-drop, 1-drop is reasonable if you get the Goblin, and Goblin Leader gets you a bunch of value. You can just throw it out, sack it, and then save one of your 4-drops for your Evo turns. Again, these 2 cards, same deal. You can just sack them and then save these cards to Evo. And then Kai'Sa, just freebie Evo. You'll take it when you don't have all the value tied up on your Evos, and you'll be happy with taking it regardless. Splendor, again, the buff thing is like inconsistent. Like you can't actually get this, which is sort of funny because it's a 5. But your stuff is actually super small, just like swords, so you won't get like super crazy lethals off this. Fun fact, I believe, it's only the buff followers, and I guess the owlbear that can live the thing. Craving, you can throw it on your own thing, which is sort of funny, but for the most part, you're just using it as the standard, ping that hopefully your opponent doesn't have like counterplay to it, and then you don't have to deal with the follower anymore. So Catalina ends up being good in Forest just because of like the same reason it's good in Sword, because you're pressuring a lot, and you just drop down the turn 6 Catalina without Evo, and you can have it soak up 1/2 followers and then continue a snowball from there. So Reina has the benefit of just having fairies in your hand. Like turn 9 onwards, it's a 6/6 and reliably ping. It's like a ping 3, or you can Evo into a 2-drop, and that's really like super valuable. And like 7 play point 6/6 is nothing to slouch at either. Again, Force doesn't really have 7s. If you'll pick up a 7, this is definitely one of the stronger ones you can pick, other than like going into the legendary pool. Lowain's great for your value, 3 play point 2/2 draw cards, draw the bro families, get the late game inevitability. The Storm one's especially good in Forest, so you'll be happy to pick these up. Your 4s, great cards, you might actually be like clogged up on Forest, so you have to be like selective about them. But again, these are like your 4, you only have like 4 neutrals to take, so taking 1 or 2, like even if you end up with 1 or 2, you'll be very happy with these cards. And same thing, like hard removals, like Whisper sometimes, I won't say it's bad, but you might not want it all the time. You might just want the hard removal. Like Retribution's super good in Forest because it lets you play aggro, and then just, having hard removal is definitely nothing you want to leave out of your deck. Alright, I guess that's it for the Forestcraft. I love how these all magically end up being 1 hour. Like I don't really time these, or definitely don't rehearse them. So again, thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.